It's good to know which teams decided to come tonight, especially since a lot of you guys have advanced to the next level. And it is now 7:30, so I'm going to officially begin. Welcome everybody to the first ever that I can think of Zoom rule night for students. In the past years, the referees of the regional championship would actually get together in Zoom and we would discuss how we would call certain rules. And then about 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, I had this crazy idea is why don't we just invite the students as well to be in on the discussion? So welcome everyone. We have our regional head referee, and I wanted to clarify what that means. The fact that he is the regional head referee is that he does not really act as head referee pretty much at all. It's an educational role. He just is the person to go to for all of our head referees about certain rule interpretations. But Dr. Michaud will not be the head referee at the regional championship. He will be most likely event manager or first technical advisor. Before I let him go about the rules, I want to start with the number one rule for our program in First Tech Challenge. And it's not a rule. There's no GS0 or G0 or S0 rule, but gracious professionalism is the mantra and the philosophy of First. It's even trademarked by First. It's what we are all about. So I thought we would start the meeting tonight by a video you might have seen before or might not have seen before. But I wanted to remind our region that we must at all times have gracious professionalism.
Hi, I'm Woody Flowers, and I've been part of First for a long time. I really love how First helps us learn that working hard can be fun and profoundly satisfying. In First, we do our best work while helping others and treating folks with respect and kindness. This ethos is something I like to call gracious professionalism. As you go through this first season, please remember that it is extremely important. In fact, it's expected that you practice gracious professionalism. Everyone, First students, coaches, parents, volunteers too. It's not always easy, but it will make First a sweet experience, and it can have a big positive impact in all areas of your life. So go be kind and creative.
The reason why I'm bringing up gracious professionalism is some of our volunteers have noticed a decline of gracious professionalism in our region. We are noticing one of the most common things we see is through the frustration of the gameplay and stuff, we're noticing that a lot of people are yelling excessively at each other, not only with the opposite team, but who you're working with and people from your own team. So we want to make sure that we return the kindness and the professionalism and the graciousness back to our region. So that's the first rule I wanted to go over was please exhibit behaviors of gracious professionalism at our future events, which we have 2 amazing semi-regionals, a last call qualifier, and the regional championship. We want to see an improvement from all teams about how people behave, how they talk to each other, and so forth. So at this time, we're now going to go into gameplay rules, and I'm going to let Dr. Michaud lead this charge, and we'll do a Q&A at the end.
All right, thanks, Lon. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm so gratified that so many people have joined us. And I'm just going to start with a rule to begin with. Lon mentioned gracious professionalism, and he said there's no rule about it, but there is. It's G30. So just to pull up what G30 says, I know it'll be hard to read on your screen, but G30 is egregious behavior. And egregious behavior is at the discretion of the head referee. and carries with it a major penalty and a yellow card and a red card. So there is actually a rule available, and the chief referee for FTC has been pointing it out numerous times in the various referee forums that this is an option for referees who believe that team members are not behaving in a graciously professional manner. So I just want to go ahead and point that out. I do have a little bit of a presentation that I'm following, but I don't expect it to take too long because I want to be able to get to your questions. On the call with me, I know there's myself, of course, Lon. Emily Yesh is here. I believe she will be the head referee for the regional championship, as well as a couple of events. Hi, Emily.
Hi.
And of course, any of the referees, please feel free to jump in if you feel like I'm saying anything wrong, or if you need a clarification or you think that would be helpful or useful. All right, let me just run through the presentation that I created here real quick. All right, so rules night, just to give kind of a sense of where we are. We've already done that part. Just a disclaimer, although I'm the chief referee, I'm going to give you my best interpretation of the rules as I see them. But at an event, it's up to your head referee, right? And I will be at many of the events that are coming up, and the head referee at the event has the option, if I'm there, to come over and ask my advice, or I may go and advise them of something if it's particularly important to do so. But it's really up to the head referee at the event to make the final decisions based on their understandings of the rules and so forth. So this is kind of our discussion where we try and get everybody on the same page, but at an event, it's up to them. Where we are, we have 3 or 4 remaining events. We have the 2 semi-regional tournaments. We have the last call qualifier and the regional championship, and that will end the NTX FTC season. Of course, after that is the state championship and then the world championship. One thing I want to start by noting about the remaining events, with maybe the exception of the last call qualifier, is that we consider these to be championship level events. They are events above the basic tournament level. And that has some implications for things that happen at the events. One of the first ones is that the competition at the event is stiffer. It's just the teams that are at those events are, they've advanced. They're going to be stronger and more competitive than what you might have experienced at a league meet or a league tournament or at a qualifier. The other thing is that because it's a championship level event, the volunteers, the event staff, our expectation of teams is higher. We expect you to perform at a higher level than what you might do at, say, a league meet or a tournament. And that performance is not only on the field, it's in all aspects of the tournament. And as a result, we tend to call rules and penalties a little bit more strictly, where we might have some leniency in rules and penalties. Once you get to this next level, we're going to follow the rules much more closely, where we might have maybe let something slide. Now, that's not to say that we won't let anything slide, right? That's again up to the head referee to decide. And they do have a G10 rule, which allows them to not penalize things if they are inadvertent and inconsequential. But just as a general case, the rules tend to be called more strictly, and we expect teams to be more prepared for the event than what we might otherwise. They should be ready for events, for matches. When you come to the event, we expect you to have a robot that can play, not that you're busy working on things or adding last minute things or otherwise doing things that won't let you pass inspection. When we're in the middle of matches, you're expected to be aware of the match timing, of where we are in the match schedule, and be arriving at the field in a timely manner. And if you're not, then there can be penalties associated with that. Also, just to give an idea, this is something I always advise my teams and also my team parents that are on the teams, because they'll advance to another level of competition and they're often surprised at how different that level of competition is. So I just like to set some expectations. So if you're going to a semi-regional, just keep in mind that of the teams that are in that semi-regional, which is 32 of them, you may have gotten an award to get to the semi-regional, or your robot performed well or whatever, but that's true of everybody there. Everybody there got to that event on an award of some sort or on good robot performance. That's the only way you can make it to the semi-regional. So of the 32 teams that will be competing at your semi-regional, 3 of them are going to be Inspire Award finalists. 2 or 3 of them, depends on which semi-regional you're at. And 6 to 9 of them came from the Finalist Alliance. They were in the playoffs at their league tournament. And 12 to 18 of them won some sort of award. So, you know, the teams that are there when you get to a semi-regional, our experience in North Texas is the semi-regional competitions are very competitive. They are very tight because it's a lot of teams that are very similar characteristics. And so just expect and know that when you go to that event, it's going to be an intense day. It's a fun day. The semi-regionals are some of the best events that you can have, but just know that it is going to be more competitive than what you may have experienced previously. Similarly, the regional championship, should you make it to the regional championship, it's going to be 36 teams. 8 of them won Inspire Awards at some level. There are 8 Inspire Award winners. There are 16 Inspire Award finalists at the regional championship. So that's almost 20 to 24 teams. More than half of the teams got there because they were an Inspire Award or Inspire level team. There will be 8 winning alliance captains at the regional championship and 8 winning alliance first picks. Right now, if you add all of that up, you can quickly say, wow, that adds up to more than 36. And it does, because some of the Inspire Award finalists were also winning alliance captains, or there may be a variety of other ways. But just know, if you make it to the regional championship, you are in a class of teams that is at the very top of their First Tech Challenge game. And that's how you make it to the regional championship. And what I advise my parents in the years when we've been fortunate to move on from the regional championship to a level such as the state championship, it's the same when you get to the state championship. Everybody there was good in their region, and that's how they got there. And the competition is going to be pretty intense. Lon's already talked about gracious professionalism. I had it on here too, because I feel strongly about it as well. When you're at an event, things go wrong. We understand that at every phase of the event. Not just when you're on the field, not just when you're judging, but at every phase of the event, please show gracious professionalism to your teammates, to the other teams, especially to our volunteers who have been very giving of their time and energy this season to be able to put on these events, to our event hosts. Just make it a point to make the event as enjoyable as possible for everybody. We're there for everybody to have an opportunity to learn, to have fun, and to experience a great competition. All right, so game rules. I'm going to go to some game rules. I'm going to call out a few that are special, including some that may surprise some people. They surprised me when they came out. And just talk a bit about game rules and tournament conduct and things that you may not be aware of. So the first one is, again, we expect teams to perform at championship level at these events. We're leaning on rule interpretation, but that's always up to the HR. So you don't get to say you have to call such and such a rule. The HR gets the final decision. Match delays receive penalties more quickly than what we might do at a regular event. So if you're late coming to the field, or if you're busy working on your robot in the pit and you're supposed to be on the field, our head referees know that they can start assigning delay of game penalties. And I'll just give a background story to this for a little bit. And I'm gonna switch away from the slides here for a second. When I was the partner in charge for the North Texas region, I always dreaded the regional championship finals because teams were notorious for not putting their robots on the field. And so the whole event would be delayed because teams would be working in the pits. The cuers are telling them you need to come to the field, and they just look around and they say, you're not going to start until we get there. So we're just going to take as long as we want. Well, there's an answer to that, and that's called delay of match penalties. And so you can expect that as you're at these events, if your robot is not at the field when it's time for the match to start, the head referee can and likely will start assigning match delay penalties in order to keep things moving along, because the championship events run long in the day. It's just because of the competitiveness. The judges have a hard time. They run long. We want to be able to get people home in a timely manner, and it's not fair for a few teams to hold up everything for the entire event. So we really want teams to be aware that you need to be doing things in a timely manner. The other thing that I'll say is sometimes a rule will come up and people will say, well, I saw this YouTube video and the referees didn't call it there, and that doesn't matter. Just because some other region has referees that aren't calling all the rules, or they're calling the rules in a different way than what we're told to do, doesn't mean it makes it legal in this particular region. Same thing for the previous event. You could say, well, I was at League Meet 1 and they let us do it at League Meet 1. It doesn't matter. This is a championship level event and we're going to call it according to the rules as much as we can. So just because something happened a particular way at another event you were at or observed, doesn't change the rules. It doesn't change the way that the referees will necessarily call it at this event. Your sources for rules are always Game Manual Part 1 traditional events and Game Manual Part 2 traditional events. This is the place to go and look for the rules, as well as any updates that have been done to the manuals. So if you want something official, look there. More importantly, go to the FTC Q&A forums, especially if you have questions about any of the rules. They offer rule clarifications and updates for the robot game. There have been many, which I'll go over here in a little bit. Anything that is in the Q&A forum overrides anything that is in the game manual. So if the game manual says one thing and the Q&A forum says another, the Q&A forum is the official source. So just be aware of that. And I'm going to go right into a couple of Q&A forum rulings that I think will affect teams or could affect teams in terms of what would be happening. One of the biggest just came up a couple of weeks ago, and it is Rule 288, Q288, the Q&A forum. And then there have been a few follow-on questions. So Q315, Q318, Q55. And to give you an idea of what this looks like when I start talking about these different rule things, I'm going to go to my Chrome window, if I can find my Chrome window here. Right. And just go to the Q&A forum. So if you go to the Q&A forum, it's at ftcqa.firstinspires.org. If you have a specific type of thing, you can search for it. And so I'm just going to search for the word ARC, and it'll just come up with Q288. And so when I say Q288 or Q315, that is the number of the question that was asked by a team or a coach or a volunteer asking for clarification. And so that is what is being answered here. I'm going to make the text bigger to hopefully make it easier for people to read. So Q288 is about arc-shaped junction guides. So an arc-shaped junction guide, you may have seen robots, your robot may have this as well, is anytime you have something round, I can't really do round with my fingers, but if you have something V-shaped or if you have something round to go around a junction to kind of help the cone or whatever you're scoring go onto the junction pole, then you have some sort of a guide. If you have something that touches the pole and is attempting to make it easier for your robot to score, then you have some sort of a guide. Early in the season, the game design committee left it pretty vague about when did a guide of some sort go from being a flat surface touching a pole to being something that is actively controlling the pole. And in Q288, which just came out about 3 weeks ago and was answered only about 2 weeks ago, they have clarified this for referees. And so if your guide, if something that you're using to guide the cone onto the pole contacts the pole, and if it has a radius that is smaller than the bottom of a cone, so that is a 2-inch radius or smaller, or the cone has a 4-inch diameter. So you can think of it either radius or diameter, right? And it interacts with the guide or the junction cone, then you are considered to be controlling the pole, and that earns a G25 violation. So if you have had a robot previously and it has a small U-shaped type of mechanism on it that's designed to interact with a junction pole in order to score a cone, you need to make sure that the radius of that U part of the curved part is at least a 2-inch radius or more. Otherwise, referees, when they see it, if they see it contacting the pole, they're likely to call a G25 penalty on you. The first instance of G25 in an event is a warning, and all subsequent instances are minor penalties. And if it's repeatedly violated, it can result in major penalties and cards. So just just be aware of this and start redesigning your robot if you are using that sort of an arc-shaped guide. I'll open that up for questions here in a little bit if there are comments on that. And there are a lot of teams, including very, very top teams in the world, who are now having to redesign significant portions of their robot as a result of this ruling from a couple of weeks ago. There is a grace period up until February 16th. So if you are competing this Saturday, this rule doesn't necessarily apply to you. You'd still have to be under the old rule, but for anybody on the following week, then it will apply to you, and certainly it applies at the regional championship and subsequent events. So just be very aware of the things. If you have any sort of feature on your robot that is trying to use the robot to guide the cones onto the poles, then make sure you're compliant with this rule. Defensive strategies. There's often a lot of discussion about what can we do in the way of defense. And the thing that whenever I'm head refereeing an event, the thing that I always tell drivers during the drivers meeting about defense, because I'll often get questions about what can I do for defense. And my common statement is something along the lines of, if your intention, if your strategy, if what you're doing, if you're doing it with a purpose to make it harder for the opponents to score, you better be sure you know all of the rules and the forum posts relating to defense. Right? It's on you to do that, to know that. And again, this is especially a case where just because you heard somebody talking about it on Discord as a way of doing defense, or you saw somebody playing this sort of defense on a YouTube video, that does not make it legal. So I put down a partial list of the Q&A forum posts that I could find that have to do with defense. And they are listed there: Q209, Q130, Q121, Q129, so forth. I'm not going to read them all, as well as the relevant rules, G26, 28, 29, 30, GS3, GS8, GS10, GS12. And there are probably a bunch more that I didn't catch. Generally, First Tech Challenge likes offense more than defense. I know defense is a really tempting strategy, especially when you're up against a team that you think might score a lot. But the First Tech Challenge wants the game to be about people accomplishing things and not about people preventing other people from accomplishing things. That's really more the spirit of First Tech Challenge. So the rules around defense tend to be pretty severe. Usually they start at major penalties and they move up to yellow or red cards pretty quickly. The GDC, that stands for the Game Design Committee, this season has made it repeatedly and abundantly clear that any strategies the team takes that is done with the design of trying to block, impede, or obstruct opponents' ability to score is not legal gameplay. That's not to say there aren't things that you can do that would cause another team to have to slow down, but if you're causing them to have to slow down or you're causing significant delays for the other team, it's very likely illegal. And so you want to make sure that you understand the rules and not learn about it when the referee tells you what the rule actually may happen to be. And again, we'll take more questions about these. One thing that has occurred at a few of our events through the various league meets, and this is a new season for having leagues throughout the region, so we understand we have new volunteers, for which we're grateful. We have a lot of teams that are rookie teams this year. We had a huge amount of that. So as we go into the championship level events, I want to reiterate the rules about and the guidance about how you interact with referees at the field and how you get questions answered. And so there's actually a Q&A post about this. It's Q280. And I just basically copied and pasted it from the page directly here. Which is that if you have a question about the scoring, and this especially means if you're looking at the field timer that shows what the scores are, and you feel like the referees haven't gotten all of your points in, then talking it over with the referees at the field is not the place to do it. And that's the first thing that it says. There is a time and place to ask questions of the head referee. At the field and before the scores of a match are finished is neither. So There's a rule that says how you do it. What you do is allow the referees to finish their scoring, allow them to finish it. Keep in mind that what appears on the field timer is not necessarily what is in their tablets. There's a thing that the referees are encouraged to press where once the teleoperated period is over, it stops sending updates from their tablets to the field timer display. So just because you don't see it on the field timer display doesn't mean they're going to miss it. You allow them to submit the scores, and then if you have a question about the score, then you send a student representative to the question box. The head referee will come by to answer any questions that they may have about the scoring, including potentially changing the scores if they believe an error was made in scoring.
And vice versa. Just because the score is not updating for your opposing alliance doesn't mean it's not updating either. So my best advice, friends, is ignore the field timer when the match is over. Whatever scores you see, slight updates or not, ignore them. What matters is what's on the event website, which is ftc-events.firstaspires.org. I'm going to put the link in the chat. And the final alliance reveal of who the winner was. That's what matters, not the field timer.
Okay, thanks, Lon. Let's see here. At the end of the match, when the buzzer sounds, put your controllers down and hit stop. That's a safety thing for us. Again, we tend to be a little bit lax about it. Sometimes when you get to later events, they get much more strict about it. And so, when the buzzer sounds, put down your controllers, hit stop, let us get on the field safely and do whatever needs to be done for that. Wait for the referees to discuss penalties and finalize the scores. Be patient. It sometimes takes a while, especially if some unique situation occurred during the match where they need to go and check the rules. When they go to check the rules, it doesn't mean they don't know the rules. It means that maybe something odd happened and they often just want to verify that they get it right. The referees really understand how important it is to get the scores and and whatever infractions are there correct so that you can have a correct result. And sometimes they just want to double check. Leave your robots alone until the field staff tells you to, and then again, send any questions about scoring or penalties to the question box. For those teams that are fortunate enough to make it to the playoffs in the events coming up, if you're a veteran team, you know that we used to have timeouts. There are no more timeouts in FTC. What happens now is that if you go to a playoff match, and you play the playoff match and you win the match, and that means you're playing in another match, you have 8 minutes from the time that the scores were posted from the match you just played until it is time for you to have your robot on the field and ready to play. And the scoring system even displays a timer showing how much time is remaining. And at the end of that 8 minutes, if your robot is not on the field, the head referee can begin imposing penalties for that, including delay of match penalties or otherwise. So just be aware that in playoffs, I know a lot of teams, some things happen in playoffs. Playoffs are really intense. The robot breaks down or you're busy trying to get something and you just need that last thing to have that last little edge to be able to win the playoff match, but you only have 8 minutes to do it. It's 8 minutes from when the scores are posted until your robot is on the field and ready to play. Now, if you have your robot on the field and some sort of technical issue has come up and it needs the assistance of an FTA, they don't have to start the match right then, but just be aware that you need to signal your intent to be ready to play at the end of the 8-minute period. And with that, I'll leave it for open discussion. I'm going to open it first to Lon and Emily if there's anything important that they thought that I missed. If so, I'll cover those. And if not, then I would say you can post messages in the chat window, or you could just unmute your mic and feel free to ask them that way.
All right, I wanted to show the crowd this new rule about grasping the pole. I went on Onshape real quick and I started to kind of design a surface that would touch the pole. Can we see my screen, Patrick?
Yes.
All right, so this dotted circle represents the pole. It's 1.05 inches on the outer diameter, as far as I understand it. Yes. So this surface obeys the rule because the radius of the surface touching the pole is 5 inches. The rule is now 2 inches, I believe.
At 2 inches is the smallest you can be.
So 2 inches right there. So a shape of this right here, that's the limit now. If you have anything much more radical than that, like 1.5 inches, right? That's now illegal. That's grasping the pole. So you want to make sure that that mechanism is the radius of this curve touching it is 2 inches. Obviously, a flat surface touching the pole, that's a radius of infinity. So that definitely applies. So if you have a flat surface touching the pole, then you're good. So hopefully that clarified what that rule means. So, and that's why we like to use programs like Onshape to help us solve these problems. All right, will you be out? So put the questions in the chat unless Emily had something to add.
Oh no, I just saw Akshay's thing about why referees don't watch videos, and since it deals with X Squared tournament where I got so many teams asking me about reviewing videos, I thought I might touch on it. We can't review videos as referees and as head referees in the question box. And the reason we can't review videos is because we would be stuck there all day having to do video replays of every single match. It's just not logistically possible for our to ask our referees to review videos. Because of that reasoning. And this question has come up so many times. I don't think I've had a single question box interaction this season where I haven't been directly asked by a student if they can show me video replay. And the answer is a very firm no. We can never, under any circumstance, watch video replay. Or as our other head referee, Michael Mannix, would say, sure, we can watch your video replay, but as soon as we watch it, we're not going to change the score of the match at all.
Yeah. Right.
And I'll just make clear that is a First Tech Challenge rule. That's not
Yes.
something we've done locally. That is something that we are explicitly told that we're not allowed to view video replays.
All right. So we have a question. How will we inspect the radius of the curvature? Well, one thing
Well, the quick answer is that's what a cone is for. So the radius, the minimum radius is defined as the radius of the bottom part of a cone. So if you're literally, you can take a cone and put it up next to the thing that is an arc. And if the cone goes in and it doesn't touch but in one spot, you're good. If it doesn't fit in, then your radius is too tight.
Yeah, so use your cones at school to check, or at home to check to see if that surface is completely grabbing it or less or more. So
yeah, the actual Q&A forum discussion says that the minimum radius is the bottom edge of a cone, which we know to be 2 inches, and they specify that. But the official thing they say is the bottom edge of a cone. That's how people can check.
And so when is it inspected? The inspector of the robot should be checking it. But if a referee has a suspicion, he might check it he or she might check it at the field.
Correct.
So, all right. How to define touch? Some teams push the junction with a very large tilting angle. Is that legal?
So the Q&A forum clarification on that is you are allowed to contact the junction pole, but you can only do it at a single point. And at a single point vertically along the pole. So you could if this is a junction, my little pencil here, I can come with my robot and I can push it with a flat surface and I can push it over and stuff like that. That's, that's legal and stuff. If I do it with a V surface or a curved surface, that's where this other rule comes into play. If you touch it at more than one point, they have to be vertically aligned. So like that would be okay. But if I'm touching the pole from multiple different directions, so now we're looking at it kind of this, if I have one part of the robot touching it like this, then that would be considered controlling the pole. So touch, the actual word that's used in the rules tends to be contact, and it's the common definition of contact, which means that some component of the robot is contacting some component of the junction.
Okay, next question. Is it okay? Different teams have different ways of intaking and outtaking. Is it illegal for one robot to come into contact with another robot while that robot is intaking?
Contact happens in First Tech Challenge, right? Robots contact each other. It happens. Whether it's legal or illegal, I'm going to go with what the game design committee always does in the Q&A forum, which is I cannot absolutely say whether a particular interaction is legal or illegal. Depends upon what the referees see when it occurs, because there are many different situations. So what we call a hypothetical, we tend to not answer hypotheticals. What I can characterize is they're going to first of all look at intent. If you come into contact with another robot because you're trying to score somewhere and it's incidental, then that's less likely to draw any sort of a foul or infraction, and so forth. If it's clear to the referees that your purpose for making the contact is that you're trying to interfere with their ability to intake a cone from a substation, I will call your attention to GS12. And GS12 is not an absolute. Just a minute, I'll pull it up here. GS12 is not an absolute, but it's pretty there. It's on substation constraints, and the nice orange box that's there at the top. The intent of this rule, GS12, is to allow robot or human player access to their Alliance substation. So if you are contacting their robot in a way that is interfering with a team's attempting to intake a cone from the substation, then you could get a GS12 called on you. So that's one place where you would want to be careful. Let's say that a robot is, out in the middle of the field and they're trying to access a cone from their starter stack of cones and so forth. GS12 doesn't apply because it has to do with the substation. But again, referees can look and say, like, let's say that they're trying to grab the top cone from the stack and you run into them and you force them to knock over the entire stack of cones. A referee might say, wow, you caused that to happen and you knocked over their stack of cones. And that would carry penalties with it. So I can't absolutely say, yes, this is legal. No, it's not. It very much depends on the circumstances. But GS12 is specifically designed to allow robots to get to their substation and be able to intake cones. And if you are interfering with that, you may incur some GS12 penalties.
What if the interference is not connected to the substation? What about on the audience or the timer side of the field?
You like from the starter stacks or whatever?
Yes.
Again, it wouldn't be a GS12. It wouldn't be a GS12 penalty. But if you run into a robot's intake and you cause them to knock over one of your own cones, then you might get a penalty for that, because you're forcing them to break a rule. It's really hard to say anything that's absolute here. It really depends on what the referees observe. I will say simply contacting another robot is not a penalty. Ramming into another robot is likely a instance of a GS26, I believe it is, a G26, about deliberate damage and things like that. Yeah. So if you're contacting another robot in a way that looks like it's designed to cause harm to the robot, then you could get a G26 penalty. So there's a lot of things that can come into play there.
Okay. All right. Next question. Can you go? I'm not going to repeat the question. Did you talk about beacons?
I did not.
Yeah. A lot of confusion about beacons. We've been getting a lot of questions about what they can look like, how big they need to be, how small they can be. So can you tell us how to make a beacon?
So just looking at the specifics of the beacon, of the question, it's asking, do you just have to be larger than 3 inches in one direction, or do you have to be larger than 3 directions in all 3 directions? There's a Q&A about this, right? And so it's Q&A 116. So let me just pull up Q&A 116. And you can see there's been some confusion as to how a beacon should be measured. So if you read this answer, it probably answers it for you. The beacon has to be in a self-supporting position, right? So it has to be like sitting on a table where it's not being held in an odd orientation by a person or something else. If in any of the self-supporting positions, the beacon meets the size requirements. It's larger than 3 by 3 by 3 in each of the orthogonal directions, and it's smaller than 4 by 4 by 4, and it's visually distinguishable by a cone, then it's legal, right? So that's the Q116 is probably the easiest one that says what you need to be. So basically, if you set it on a table and it's at least 3 inches tall, 3 inches wide, and 3 inches wide in the other direction, it's a legal beacon.
But smaller than 4.
And
Now,
smaller than 4.
a lot of teams are confused about the shape of the beacon, like because of the thing about being distinguishable from a cone. What does that mean about the beacon in terms of how it can look?
Let me see if I can find a Q&A about that real quick. But Emily, do you have a quick question about that? I know you've ruled on this in the past. I mean, a quick answer on that.
On shape of beacons?
Yeah, and how much is it? How much can it be? How close can it be to a cone with not being a cone?
I mean, like from what I've seen so far in the Q&A forum, it has to be like very distinguishable from a cone, and that can kind of be objective, and I know the game design committee has had kind of a tough time answering on this, but the way you need to think about it is a referee should be able to see your beacon and tell that it's a beacon over a cone, or you risk it not getting scored. Like, that's the issue here, right? It's less about trying to crack down a rule on you guys for arbitrary reasons and more about being able to actually distinguish a beacon from a cone. Like, while it's not cone shaped, the beacons that seem to be popular right now, where they're kind of like a stick in the air and like a little circular piece that fits around the cone, those sometimes can be very, especially if they're 3D printed, can be very hard for referees to distinguish from a cone. And so it can be hard a lot of the time for referees to see your beacon. And really what it comes down to is if your beacon looks too much like the cone that you're putting it on, you risk it not getting scored by referees because they just can't see it. One suggestion I would make to teams is if you have a beacon that kind of blends into the cones, whether it's cone shaped or it's the circular popular beacon that I've seen a lot of teams use right now, I would highly recommend writing your team numbers in black so that your team numbers are very visible and referees can see them very clearly, because that will help indicate to referees that a beacon is there. And
maybe even outline the outline of it as well, so it looks like a cartoon.
Yeah, something that makes it very kind of distinguishable. Again, the rule is really for the kids and less about trying to arbitrarily crack down. I also saw a beacon that we passed through at X Squared that I wasn't part of the robot inspection, and I was curious about it. It was a paper beacon. It was completely made out of construction paper, which I don't think is inherently illegal. But again, it was very, very difficult for the referees to know that a beacon had been scored on the cone because it was construction paper and they often couldn't see it at all.
Yeah. And I think we can safely say that if the beacon, they have to be blue or red, right? But I think it means the majority of it is blue or the majority of it is red.
Yes.
We actually have a number for that. It's 70%.
Yeah.
Okay, so there you go. If it's 70% red, it's a legal beacon. So use that other 30% wisely to make sure it's a visible beacon.
Okay, I know we have other questions coming in, but while we're on beacon questions, someone said, can we use retro-reflective material for the numbering to make the beacon more visible? Just off the top of my head, I'm going to say that's probably a no. Typically having that reflective stuff that could mess with potential imaging and stuff tends to be something that the game design committee is not on board with. I'd recommend just highlighting it in black Sharpie. Just take a black Sharpie and fill in the numbers that you 3D printed.
For beacons, there's a rule that you have to follow the same guidelines as for the robot, and there's a rule about having mirrored surfaces on your robot. So
yeah, that sounds right.
Retro-reflective might get in the way of that. Again, it's really up to the referee at whatever event you happen to be.
And I think a good example of kind of why that would be the case is for anyone who was at X Squared on Saturday. You know that we had to have our FTA stand to the side of the field holding a cardboard like box over the field so that because the sunlight coming in through the window was causing robots to not be able to read their signal cone. And retroreflective materials or anything that's mirroring kind of falls into that same category of it's very easy for you to blind your opposing alliance robot.
So while we're on the topic of beacon, what's the rules of controlling a cone and beacon at the same time?
You can control a cone and a beacon at the same time. So you can have one cone and one beacon. One of the biggest confusions with that though for teams this season is that they think that that applies to them putting the beacon into the substation. And by that, I mean, we've seen a lot of teams where they will put a beacon on a cone and then the human player will put that cone beacon duo into the substation. And that is not allowed. The beacon must enter the substation on its own. You cannot put it in there with a cone. It is a one piece on its own, but you can put it on top of a cone and then the robot can score the cone and the beacon at the same time.
So in a funny way, you could say a robot can control both at the same time, but a human can't.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
And the best technique is we've been seeing human players just drop the beacon onto the cone. Is that legal?
Dropping it on the cone is almost certainly legal. What's likely to get you a penalty, it's a G22 penalty, is if you are attempting to press your beacon down onto the cone. So, if you can do it with a quick motion, it's probably okay. But if you're sitting there and you go, you really like push it, like if it's obvious that you're pushing it down and maintaining an extended form of contact, but where extended is like more than half a second or more, in an attempt to get the beacon to wedge itself onto the cone, that's likely a G22 violation. The G22 violation is anytime that you're manipulating things that are inside the field.
Mm-hmm. What if they bring a screwdriver and a hammer and they hammer it on? Can they do that?
That will probably incur all sorts of penalties and require us to do lots of looking up in the manual. Lon, we're getting messages that some people are not able to join right now, even though we only have 78 participants. There are more registrations and not get through. Should we just keep going or?
Well, what happened is the registration link closed, and so people who were trying to sign up for the event after it got started weren't able to get in. But we are going to post this on YouTube and they can watch our results of our answers. So
okay.
All right. So we've answered the beacon and cone questions and how the human player can deal with that. Let's talk about autonomous interference. How does autonomous interference occur? So, especially in terms of the center line.
So interactions that take place at the center line junctions are generally not going to receive a penalty as long as it's clear that the interaction you're trying to do is because you're trying to score. If you are doing something at the center line where you might be in the act of scoring, but it appears to a referee that you're also trying to interfere with another robot, that is a purposeful thing, then you will likely get the major penalty for autonomous interference. So the center line is not an absolute ability to be able to do just whatever you want, right? That is not there. There are a large number of Q&A questions that deal with interactions at the center line. But the general sense of it is if you're trying to score at the center line and your robot collides or has an interaction with another robot that's at the center line, and it's pretty clear that both of you were just trying to score and it was just a fluke of timing or something, then that's not likely to get a penalty on either side. If, on the other hand, it looks like you're trying to position your robot so that in the act of scoring, you're also going to block your opponent from being able to score, referees may see that. And again, it's up to the referees at the event. They may see that as being purposeful defense, and that's not allowed.
What about a robot that accidentally, because the programming goes haywire, just goes the opposite side of the field?
You still get the penalties.
How's that called?
You still get the penalties.
Okay.
even if it's not intentional. There's actually a very specific Q&A forum question about that, where a robot went too far to park, and it parked in the opponent's parking zone instead of their own. And that blocked a robot from being able to score on the center line junctions and to be able to park itself. And it was ruled it's a major per attempted cone and park. So just because the other robot went all the way across and was just parking, it wasn't attempting to score, and it happened to park on the other side of the field, and that interfered with the robot that was attempting to score some of the cones that were already on the field and to park itself. It was a major per attempt. So you can quickly lose a match that way.
Okay, we have a question in the chat. Can we get an example of situations where GS29 come into play?
I have to look up GS29 again.
It's illegal use of game elements.
I don't think there is a GS29. I think there's a G29. So
yeah, G29.
G29.
Which is illegal use of game elements.
So an example of an illegal use of game element, let's say I'm the Red Alliance, right? And I happen to know that red cone standing upright, if the blue robot knocks it over, then they're going to get a minor penalty for that. So if I start standing up cones on the field in strategic locations where blue is likely to run into them, or where the only way that blue can do things is by running into them to get the penalties, that would be G29. That would be an illegal use of game elements, because you're using the cones to try and make the scoring harder for the other side. So that's probably one of the most common versions of G29. There are others as well. But that's the common one I can think of for this season's game. Now, obviously, you can score a cone if you score it on a junction, and that makes things harder for the other side to do something. That's not a penalty, right? Because you're allowed to legally score things. But if it looks to the referees like you're trying to use the cones in a way that just makes it much easier for your team to accomplish something, or much harder for the other team to accomplish something, then you might be in jeopardy of getting a G29 violation.
So there was a scenario in Discord this week that was brought up. I want to bring it up to this forum. So let's say the Red Alliance introduces their beacon early on purpose, and they know that it can't be, it's not going to get the points, but they score it on a pole to prevent the Blue Alliance from being able to score cones on that pole during the teleoperated period before in-game. GS29 or some other ruling?
If it looks deliberate, it's a G29.
Wait, would that beacon even be eligible to cap and own anyway, because it wouldn't be scored?
Yeah.
So
the idea
for that I have to look up another rule.
Yeah. So it won't get the points. It's as if it doesn't exist in terms of points, but does the rule still apply of the other alliance is not allowed to score on top of it?
So, well, if the other alliance, let's say that red introduces a beacon early, right? And blue notices that it was introduced early, and so they know that it's not going to count. And red goes and puts the cone on a junction anyway, and blue goes and sticks theirs on top. The very specific rule is GS10. And what GS10 says is robots may not place their own alliance cone or beacon on top of an unscored opposing alliance cone or beacon. There
you go. So it's not scored.
Well, no, it says you can't put it on an unscored one, and it's not unscored. It is unscored. So I think that would be that would possibly get a penalty. But I if it looked deliberate, then I would call that a G29. Let me see if you can do it on top of a scored beacon. I'll have to look and see what happens if you try and do it on a scored beacon, but that's clearly an unscored beacon. And you're putting it on top, so you could get the penalty for that. Yeah, I would have to look, and there's probably a Q&A question that answers them about that. Let's see, and there's not a beacon constraint on it. So That might be one that actually deserves a question to the referees if it's not already been answered somewhere. I have not seen that specific situation.
All right, well, it's a strategy that was being discussed in Discord. So if you really want to play that strategy, ask it on the game forum. All right.
If you play that strategy, right? I mean, the fact that it's being discussed, to me, that means it's a deliberate strategy. And now it is deliberately using a game element in order to amplify the difficulty of the game for the other side. So, you know, if referees are aware of that discussion taking place on Discord and you actually do it, you better be able to make the case that you were completely innocent about it when you're actually not innocent because you knew it was a strategy.
Yeah. All
Which
right.
then goes back to that, like, once if you get caught doing that and you've been caught like lying to the referees, and like you spiral down this like egregious behavior roll down that could lead to yellow cards and red cards because you've decided to play a deliberate strategy and go against gracious professionalism.
Yeah, deliberately breaking the rules is always a G30 violation. You may or may not get caught at it, but it's a G30 violation. And the penalties for G30 are yellow cards, red cards, major penalties, and even dismissal from the tournament is a consequence of G30.
Ooh. Let's not have that, guys.
Yes, exactly.
I don't want that phone call, especially on the 18th. All right. Okay, so let's talk about the ground junction next to the substation. This was asked in the chat. This has been a hot topic actually in North Texas recently. So let's say Red Robot is trying to score on the ground junction near the blue substation. What would be considered interference?
So let me make sure I have it. So Red Robot wants to score on the ground junction in front of Blue's substation. Red has a right to score on that junction. So let's just start with that, right? Blue can't infinitely block the junction by intaking and doing all sorts of things. So if there's a blue robot sitting on top of that ground junction and a red robot carrying a cone comes over to the ground junction, appearing that it has an intent to score, the blue robot must give way. It must allow red the opportunity to score that cone on that ground junction. Red has an obligation to not delay. And this is listed in a number of Q&A forum posts. In other words, red should come in, it should score it, and it should get out of the way. It can't sit there and take a long period of time to score the junction in an attempt to make it hard for blue to access its substation. Now, there have been questions on the Q&A forum. Well, exactly what constitutes a long period of time? That is up to the referees at the event. A robot that has had no trouble scoring on ground junctions throughout all of the matches, but suddenly takes 15 or 20 seconds to score on the ground junction in front of the substation, referees may say that looks a little suspicious and say, okay, you're now trying to play defense and that's not allowed, and a GS12 violation could occur. If you just get in, you score it, and you get out, then it's okay. So the sequence that has to happen is that the junction has to be blocked by blue somehow. Red approaches, they have to have a cone. It can't just be that they're coming by. They have to look like or a beacon. They have to look like they're having some reasonable intent to score. Blue is obligated to give them an opportunity to score. Red is obligated to score in a timely fashion and then move out of the way to allow blue access to its substation.
I will say also, like, to tag on to that, as a head referee and a long-term time head referee, like, one of the things that I'm watching for on the field is if a robot is like struggling, because my response is going to be to immediately call for an FTA. I'm sure many of you have heard me yelling for FTAs at an event. So I will say it's very obvious the difference between a defensive strategy and your team struggling to score, and the way that you react and all of those different things. So, like, if you are taking a lot of time because you're just like, your robot has broken down and you're struggling to score, I'm going to, like, it's going to be apparent to the referee crew. So that's just a thing to keep in mind.
Right. Okay, all right. So the human player, what are the rules for them introducing cones? A cone gets knocked over. Can they change it? What's the rule with that?
So once a cone is on the field, the human player cannot interact with it.
Okay, so once you set it down, it's set.
Correct.
Human player does not have the right to change it. Can the human player take the cone and touch the other cones with that cone?
No. They can place it, they can stack them on top, right? But they can't manipulate them. Right.
I
So
want I
Go
want to
ahead.
clarify and back this up because I think there can be some confusion here. A cone is considered on the playing field as soon as you cross the barrier of the playing field wall with it. As soon as you cross that plane, the cone has entered the playing field, and your options are to sit it down. And that's it. If even once you've crossed the physical plane of that playing field wall, even if you're just like stuttering, like if you pull back and don't go to sit it down on the floor, that can still like award penalties. Like you need to sit it down as soon as you cross the barrier of the playing field wall.
So if you have an upright cone in the substation already and you want to place the cone on top of an existing upright cone, you're allowed to do that. You're not allowed to move the location of the upright cone. So you're not allowed to like place it on and then shift it, a half an inch or an inch to the side. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to use the cone to upright another cone. You're not allowed to place the cone in the substation and cause another cone to move out of the way. So you can place a cone in the substation, but you're not allowed to do things that cause any existing cones in the substation or on the field to move.
Okay, during the 8 minutes in eliminations, after the team leaves the field, there's an 8-minute timer that starts. Can a team come back to the field and use it as a practice field?
Generally, no.
Okay. Now, Emily did specify in the chat that if the practice fields were closed or they were taken down.
It is a head referee and FTA decision.
There you go.
Yeah, that was the specification that I made, was that typically in most venues and under most circumstances in that 8-minute time between finals that you get like a time or a timeout, is that you have to go to the practice fields. We did make an exception at the X Squared tournament that teams could do their practice fields on the official playing field, but that was because teams couldn't even feasibly walk to the pits, to the practice fields, and actually get time to practice and walk back and be on time for their match.
So when in doubt, just ask the head referee.
Yes.
Or the FTA. Ask the head referee first.
Yes. You don't just go to the field and start practicing. Anytime your robot's on the field, it generally needs to be motionless other than basic setup. If you're going to do anything that causes your robot to move, that is to drive around or extend significantly beyond its setup position, you need to clear it with a referee and preferably the head referee first or the FTA.
I will say, I actually want to preface that as the person who will be head referee at regionals and at one of the semi-regionals, all things that you want to do should be cleared with the head referee before you do them. Like your questions should not be going to regular referees. They should be coming to your head referee.
Right. So I'm repeating things in the chat just for the sake of the YouTube. Can you score more than one cone on a ground junction? Yes.
Yes, you can.
Absolutely. In fact, it might be a good strategy if you can't do anything else. Okay, let's talk about signal sleeve rules. We haven't really touched on it. So there's some things that people don't know about it. For instance, can I get some crayons and draw a signal sleeve, Patrick?
No, you cannot.
Okay, then what must I do to have a signal sleeve that's legal?
It must be printed on a sheet printing device such as a laser printer or a color inkjet printer or something that prints sheets.
So if I print a QR code, does that affect anything?
You can print a QR code. You can print an April tag. You have to make sure it's printed. You're not allowed to draw it on there. You're not allowed to handwrite your team number onto the cone, onto the signal sleeve.
So you're not allowed to even handwrite your team number on the signal sleeve.
Correct. The Q&A forum answer to that is if you want to do that, then print your signal sleeve, write the handwrite your team number on it, then make a photocopy of it and use that. Then it
Yeah.
becomes legal.
Yeah. All right. Are there penalties for accidentally flipping over a robot?
I'd like to answer this. Hi, 18270. Um, so I know why y'all are asking this, and the flipping and tipping, I don't remember what G rule it is, but it's a G rule.
26.
G6. Okay.
26.
26. G26. Okay. The call with tipping is very dependent on a lot of things. And if you read G26, they actually play through a lot of different scenarios of what would constitute a penalty in the case of like tipping another robot. In most cases, if it's accidental and it's up to the head referee, like Patrick said at the beginning of this, there's a lot of things that come up to the head referee call. If the head referee deems it as accidental, it's not a penalty. But for instance, if something on your robot, such as like cabling that very clearly could cause entanglement is what caused the tipping, then that could warrant a penalty. Or if it was deemed as deliberate, it would obviously warrant a penalty. Like if it was very clear that your robot reached out and tipped over the other robot. But in cases like the match that 18270 is undoubtedly referring to, the referees deemed that as not a penalty score. And the reason why is because it was an entanglement of both robots. It was wires on one and a claw on another that caused the tipping action. And it was just, from referee's perspective, a freak accident. So it's really one of those things that is going to definitely depend on like what the scenario is at hand.
And I pulled up G26 just to bring the rule text into play here. So what we would look for is, one, is it deliberate? If it's deliberate, yes, you violated G26. But it's really important to read this sentences too, right? Robot to robot contact and defensive gameplay should be expected. Some tipping, entanglement, and damage may occur as part of normal gameplay. It's explicitly there. It is possible for a robot to get tipped over and for there not to be any penalty consequences as a result of it. If the tipping, entanglement, or damage is ruled to be deliberate or chronic, so if you meant to do it, then you're going to get a major penalty and a yellow card. Or if it keeps happening, right? If it's chronic, if it keeps happening, multiple times, then it stops being, it's not deliberate, it starts being more, the design of your robot is kind of bringing it to that thing. But without either being deliberate or chronic, then there's often not a penalty associated with that. There is another related penalty, however. G25 is also relevant. Robots may not grab, grasp, or attach to any game element or structure other than scoring elements, unless it's specifically allowed by a rule. Notice that it says you're not allowed to attach to a robot. Right? So if your robot reaches out and grabs another robot, then you can get a warning for that. It's not a penalty immediately. You can be warned about it. And if it happens again during the competition, you could get a major penalty. So if it's a situation where a robot has a claw and it went out and it grabbed another robot and caused it to tip over, maybe that's not a penalty. The referees might say, but we're going to warn you about grabbing onto another robot. And then if it occurred later in the competition, then you could get a major penalty as a result for that.
Okay, so can a team plow through an opponent's cone for field mobility?
Is the cone upright or not? Is the cone upright? Is the cone upright or not?
Tell us both scenarios.
So if the cone is not upright, then you can plow through it and it doesn't matter. If the cone is upright and you knock it over, I believe, and I'm going to see if I can find the Q&A post, but I believe that gets you a minor.
So there's more importance to a cone being upright because some robots are designed to only grab it in that way, I bet.
Correct. Certainly if it's a stack, you're going to get penalties.
Yeah.
Let's see here if I can, let's see if I can find it. Moving, that's not it. That's their own stack. No, that's not it. Tip junction pole, I'm not looking at. Human player, can you knock it over and unconscious? Okay, plowing of an unscore upright cone stack, penalty exception, GS 6 part E subsection 3. Right, like you can see they've actually done this. They're talking about the cone stack, not the ones. So the plowing exception is intended to cover the situation of randomly placed cones on the playing field for, not the pre-placed starter stacks of cones. I don't know if there's another. Is there? Okay. Q74, penalty for knocking over opponent's cones. Is there a penalty for intentionally knocking over an opponent's cone that was previously upright but sitting on the playing field and not scored? GS6B, because the question says intentionally doing it, then it would violate GS6B and get a minor penalty. If you did it on accident or inadvertently, that's a referee call.
Okay. Speaking of the stack, can a robot move a stack of cones slightly over? Not only intent to score, just to make room?
I think the answer is no.
Okay.
I think the answer is no, you can't move. I mean,
it sounds like controlling more than one.
Yeah, you're controlling more than one. Let me see if I can find
I believe they have, like, when it's like the side stack of cones, if it's their own stack of cones, they can't move it to make room, like, but if they accidentally knock into it and it moves a little bit, that interaction is fine.
I'm sorry, I was reading and I wasn't listening. Can you repeat?
I was saying that, like, the way that I've been calling it is if it's not like a clear intent to move it to make more room or make access, which I do think violates whatever the multiple control rule is this year. But if they, like, a lot of teams just accidentally knock into their own cone stack and it moves slightly, in which case I typically don't call that penalty. But if it's clear that you're moving the cone stack to make more room for yourselves, I have been calling multiple control for that. Right.
So there's an answer here. It's not a fully complete answer. It's Q204 about moving it and so forth. Movement of 1 inch or less is inconsequential and doesn't violate GS6. And then they go through and talk about a lot of other things. It's their judgment. It's a judgment call by the refs. If you're doing it intentionally or you gain an advantage by that movement, then you would get the multiple cone violation for manipulating or controlling multiple cones. If it's clear that it was definitely inadvertent and it doesn't have a consequence to the way the game is played, then a referee could potentially say that's GS10 and they're not allowed to do that. And they can choose not to penalize a team for that. It's very much a referee call at that point.
I think a similar thing that's worth touching on that came up in X League, like early on in the season, is that the multiple control rule also applies to like sweeping out your substation. I've seen teams do that a lot early on in the season, where their human player would just not be paying attention and would start like stacking a bunch of cones into the substation, and the robots like had no ability to pick anything up. And so the solution was just to ram all at once to get all of the cones cleared out, which does violate multiple control. You can move the cone if you have a bunch of cones in your substation and it is causing you to not be able to pick up cones, then you need to either move them out one at a time or you need to find a workaround other than sweeping them all out at once, because when you sweep them all out at once, it no longer applies to incidental and inconsequential, because it does give you a consequence. It makes it easier for you to grab cones.
Yep.
Let's talk about the scenario, and I've seen this strategy, is sometimes robot mechanisms don't work and some robots resort to just putting as many cones as they can into the terminal. So as you're putting more and more cones into the terminal, if you want to score more, eventually it's going to have to come to the point to where you have to compress those cones to be closer and closer to each other. Is there an issue with controlling more than controlling more than one with this putting cones into the terminal so that you can fit more in?
In general, no. In past seasons, I haven't found the specific rule this season, but in general, if a cone is already scored and you control it and you don't change its scoring status, then and you control it, right? Or you move it or something happens, you interact with it and you're not changing its scoring status, that's not considered controlling more than one cone. So if there's like a bunch of cones in the terminal and you push another one in and it causes a bunch of cones to jostle around, but they remain scored, then that's okay. It's not, you're not controlling more than one. It's not a consequential change to what's happening.
Okay. All right. So the next question, really interesting. A lot of teams didn't know this. You are allowed to put a beacon on a ground junction, right?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Even
It's a very good strategy. It's 10 points.
Yeah. You're elevating the ground junction. Okay, so a team puts a cone and a beacon on a ground junction, and another team knocks it off. How much penalties is that team going to get?
It's a minor penalty for descoring the cone and a major penalty for descoring the beacon.
Yep.
Okay, there you go. So,
and if deliberate, it could be a G30 penalty as well.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if doing so denied the other team a circuit.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a
one thing
yellow card
that
or
I want
that would be a major and a yellow.
Okay.
Yeah. One thing I want to make clear as well, because this has been a point of confusion at several competitions I have been at. While you can score a beacon on a ground junction and get the beacon points, you cannot score a beacon in a terminal. It will not count for points.
Right.
It needs to be on a junction to score.
Yes. Oh, and another point of confusion. It's only a circuit if the two cones are in the terminals, one on each side.
Each terminal for the Alliance has to have a cone in it in order to create a circuit.
And if you feel like the match has been scored incorrectly, this is a reminder that you have up to 3 matches to contest a result, but it's better. It's more better. Look at me. I'm more English. It's better to contest it within 1 match so that all the memories are fresh in the referee's minds. In the elimination rounds, if you want to contest the result, you have to do it before you play your second round.
Before you play your next match.
Or before you play your next match.
Or before the next match that you would have been in and gets played.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
right. No, because generally, if you're going to contest something, you lost. And as a result of losing, you might not be in the next match that gets played. So you have to contest it before the next match where you would have played if the outcome had been changed.
Yes. Right. So
I don't know. I know of only one team that has contested a ruling after winning a match in playoffs.
Yeah, I wonder which team it was.
I wonder which one it was. Yes, okay. They do start with a 7.
Yeah, and they have another 7. Okay.
I've never been asked for a red card before.
Yeah.
And I probably will never be asked for a red card ever again.
Another question in the chat. We have some good questions tonight. A robot breaks down and prevents the opposing alliance from scoring. When is that a penalty and when is it not a penalty?
That's a really good question. So traditionally in First Tech Challenge, if your robot breaks down and the head referees declare that your robot is disabled, then you are no longer able to get penalties, right? So, or if let's say your robot gets caught on a junction pole, right? Which we've seen happen numerous times this season, where something happens with a robot and they get caught on a junction pole and they're not able to release the junction pole. If the head referee will sometimes say, okay, you're disabled, right? Meaning you're no longer allowed to play the game. Then they'll sometimes direct you to please move your robot to a specific spot. If it's still mobile, if it's not, then you put down your controllers, you're done for the match in that disabled point. And normally that means you are not, you won't incur any more penalties. However, In this year's game, there are 2 exceptions that I'm aware of. There may be more. One of them is if you are disabled in a way that blocks the substation or the terminal. The other one is the terminal. So if your robot is disabled in a way that prevents your opponent's access to the substation, you continue to get penalties until that gets corrected. The only way that I know of to correct it is somebody pushes you out of the substation. So maybe your opponents will be nice enough to push you out of the way so that you no longer get the penalties, or your partner can do it. They can come and push you out of the way so that you no longer get the penalties. And this is explicitly in the, there's a Q&A forum question about this, I believe, that I could locate if we need to. So in general, if your robot is disabled, if your robot's no longer functioning, you won't get penalties for that. But if you are blocking the substation or the terminal, there are specific game rule exceptions that say that you will still continue to get those. So it does say for a substation. I thought it was also for a terminal, but let me see if I can find it for a terminal as well. Definitely the substation.
And speaking of terminal, if a robot parks in the terminal and is touching its own cones, do those cones still count?
Yes. So-
Contact, yes, as long as you are not possessing the cones.
Okay.
So contact is allowed, but possession is not.
Okay, so in the terminal, it's full of cones because the team was doing that strategy. The robot parks, and just mere contact with the robot, those cones are still scored in the terminal.
Correct.
Okay, now what if your robot's touching the cones on a pole?
Those cones do not score.
Okay, even though they're not being.
In general, a robot contacting a game element prevents a robot contacting an alliance-specific game element that is the same alliance. A blue robot touching a blue cone means the blue cone can't score.
Right. Except in the terminal this year, apparently.
In the terminal, you can be touching the cones that are in the terminal and they can score as long as you are not possessing them. So the difference between possession and contact in this case is if you just, push the cones into the terminal and your robot's touching 3 or 4 of them and they're on the ground, that's no problem. If when you came into the robot, one of the cones came up and into your robot, like on top of your robot, now you are possessing it, it would not count.
All right, did you find the
no, it apparently disabled is only
in the substation, right?
In the substation. So
yeah, I was gonna say I thought you like that there wasn't anything specific to the terminal this year.
I mean, I would imagine there would be like, oops, my robot turned off and now they can't complete their circuit, is what I'm imagining.
Well, you don't get to declare yourself disabled on your own. The head referee has to declare it.
Oh.
You can ask the head referee, and there's some guidance about the sequence of events that needs to happen, and it's become very important this year. So I will make sure our head referees and our referees review that prior to the upcoming events. But it's not that you just get to go park there and then say we're disabled, so we're not going to get any penalties. It has to be something that the head referee declares in order for a disabling to take place. And let's say that you did it deliberately, or a head referee suspects that you did it deliberately. That is a G30 violation by far. And to me, it would be an instant red card. I mean, I wouldn't even go to a yellow card. I would go, that is so deliberate that it should be a red card. You lose the match.
During robot setup, we got to be very clear that the robot must be within the inner perimeter edge.
Correct. And that's different from also some previous seasons. So we actually had this happen at X League, and we double checked on the rules this past weekend, that a robot set up on the field and one of its motors was sticking out over the wall, and it was sticking out over the metal part of the wall, but not all the way outside the perimeter. In previous years, that could be allowed. This year, setup says you have to be completely in one of the setup tiles, A2, A5, F2, or F5. And the tiles do not extend beyond the wall, the inner edge of the wall. So your robot must be inside of the wall.
And also the teeth. The teeth are not part of the tile.
Correct.
In this
no, actually, no. On For setup, the teeth are part of the tile. It's only for the scoring for the signal zone that the teeth are not part of the tile.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, that I know that adds more confusion.
Right. All right. Okay. When does the game actually end?
When the buzzer sounds and everything has come to rest.
I know, but is it the beginning of the buzzer sound or the end of the buzzer sound?
Yeah. Let me see what the latest Q&A says on this.
I've always done end of the buzzer, but like my
know
thought
there's an actual
process has been that you have to hit stop on your driver station when the buzzer begins. And if it happens that when you release and the stop has happened, that you are in a scoring area such as parking or a cone drops before the end of the buzzer, then that scoring element would count. But if you hit the end of the buzzer and you have not stopped your robot and you are still going to score, we're not likely to count that.
So since this is also a referee discussion, I'm gonna update some interactions that have happened. So what I had the opportunity to referee an event in the Austin area with Bill Scheidegger, who is the state chief referee, and he was saying exactly what Emily just said, that teams have to hit stop. And finally, I asked him, I said, "Can you please tell me which rule it is and what the penalty is for not doing that?" And he went and he looked it up, and there is no rule that says you must hit the stop button at the end of the match.
Oh, wow. So we've all just been gaslighted by Bill Roach for like 5 years.
I don't know. It may have been in previous seasons. I'm not going to comment on it, but I did specifically say, I've heard this and I want to know exactly which rule it is so that I know what to tell teams when they come and ask about it. And we could not find a rule that requires hitting the stop button at the buzzer. Now,
I just found it, G20.
No, it says they must park.
Park when? When do they park?
It says they must park at the end of the period. So there's a Q&A on this. Let me pull up the Q&A.
So now let's look up what the definition of period is.
No. Let me just pull up the Q&A because it overrules anyway, right? Yeah. The Rule G20 requirement is that robots should park at the end of the period. Rule G20 contains a short grace period for robots to stop playing the game before Rule G20 violation consequences start, because the human drive team controlling an robot's actions need time to react to the end of match signals from the scoring system, right? So those signals are that the timer is 0 or you hear the sound marking the end of the period, right? A robot can continue to play the game during the end of grace period. That's the length of the sound made by the scoring system, right? Robot motion occurring after the conclusion of the end of the period should be penalized by G20. Now, what I take that to mean myself, and again, this is up to the referees, is that when the buzzer starts, right, you should take that as your cue to stop playing the game. And you have some time to put the controllers down and so forth. If you decide, oh, the buzzer started, and if I just hold it for this, 1 or 2 seconds longer, I might be able to get the robot into the terminal and get points for parking, or I might be able to drop the cone. Now you're starting to play with G20 consequences a little bit. And it's very much a red call, right? If you go through, there's nothing that says you can continue to make actions on the robot all the way up to the end of the buzzer. The expectation is that by the end of the buzzer, you are actively turning off your robot, you are actively putting your controllers down, you are finishing the game, and any subsequent robot movements that are there are from the robot doing things on its own, not from commands that you are giving it.
Right. And friends, you can program your robot to be on float and not break, so that when there's no power to the motors, that they can still keep rotating due to their inertia. And so that's going to be the difference between parking and not parking. My recommendation is that, or whatever you want to do, my recommendation is to make sure your motors are on float mode at the end of the match. So we're getting another question about Okay, we have 2 questions and we're getting toward the end, guys. What happens if you accidentally turn off your alliance member's robot?
Okay, so I commented on this.
I'll try to
And
turn it
Scott
back
and
on.
I discussed for clarity. If it's your alliance partner, then sucks. Like that's just the way that it goes. Like, sorry that happened.
Yeah.
If you let's say the red alliance robot and the blue alliance robot collides, and in that interaction, the blue alliance robot gets turned off. This applies similarly to the same ruling that we saw for the destruction and tipping the G26. Which is that if you are deliberately doing something that causes the opposing alliance's robot to not be able to play a match, you're going to be subject to the penalties along the lines of what is defined in GS20 or G26.
Right. And when I say you should try to turn it back on again, I mean the other robot. It doesn't waste too much time, but you're not allowed to reach in and change it. So be careful with that, friends.
I have seen a match. I have seen a match where one team was able to successfully turn on their partner's robot after they accidentally turned it off.
And it was victorious.
It was very cool.
It gets a lot of crowd happiness. Yep.
Anytime a robot goes from being not able to play to able to play again in a match, it's exciting and fun.
Yeah. All right, and then finally, let's end it with the. Oh, actually, just one more quick question: are motors allowed to move after hitting a nit during tele-up?
They are. It's only the level of initialization needed to prepare your robot to begin the match, and it can't be continuous motion. So like you're allowed to set servos, you're allowed to have the robot move arms to a specific spot. You're allowed to do those things, but when you signal that your robot is ready to play the match, it needs to be motionless and remain motionless until the game is started.
So for instance, when it says drivers, pick up your controllers and you hit a nit and your intake wheels start spinning, that's early gameplay.
That's early gameplay.
Yeah, that's and if it has a strategic bonus to being early gameplay, then that's a major penalty, right?
It's a major instead of a minor, correct.
Right.
So yeah, spinning up wheels, spinning up things, moving arms or stuff into a strategically useful position would likely garner the penalty. If it's just that you hit a nit and your servos twitch but they don't move to a more strategic position, then it is not. The answer to that, if you want to make sure, is don't press a nit until you hear the go sound, the bells saying it's ready to go, and then do it.
Right. Or safe probably to say when they say 1 and you hit a nit.
You might be able to, yeah. You could probably
pretty safe, I think.
Yeah.
Every time I keep threatening to close the meeting, someone asks an amazing question. So let's talk about the procedure of 2 robots that are trying to score on the same pole. How can they prevent getting penalties?
So there's an area that is defined for each junction called the junction area. For ground junctions, it's the circumference of the black disk. For the pole junctions, it's the circumference of the washer that is at the bottom of the junction,
which is the silver plate.
Yeah, the silver plate at the bottom of the junction. Once a robot has a cone in that area, if an opposing robot interferes with their attempt to score, then the other robot is going to get a GS8 penalty. So, you have 2 of them and they're trying to go there and so forth. So the question in the chat is, which robot has the right to score first? Well, the one that enters the junction area has the right to score first. And the other one has to make way. It's entirely possible that both of them reached it at exactly the same time or so close to each other that the referees can't make a determination. And in that case, if I'm a referee and neither robot was able to score or something happened and it appears to me like they got there simultaneously, I'm likely to not call it a penalty on either side. It would depend on the exact circumstances that are there. But if one is clearly there first and another one comes in afterwards and interferes, they're going to get the penalty. Just speaking for my team, if we see another team and they're scoring on a junction that we want to score on, we wait because we want to score after them because we want to own the pole.
Yeah,
like
we
literally please go ahead. right?
Be
We
our
will
guest.
wait.
Be our guest.
Please go ahead and score. We'll score right after you. We will own the poll. Thank you very much for your thing. Now then, be very careful that let's say that you know that that's going to happen. So you're getting ready. You've got your cone over a pole and another robot is coming up and they want to score. So you're thinking to yourself, well, if I just sit here in the junction area for a little while, then I'm going to stop them from scoring and delay their scoring attempts. You can't do that. So if it starts to look like you're using pole scoring in a defensive way, that you're deliberately delaying your scoring so as to delay another robot that wants to score there, then you will be blocking. The referees will say you're blocking and you start incurring blocking penalties at that point. The blocking penalties for junctions are not as severe as they are for the substation. They're minors instead of majors, and they're not immediate. They do have some delays. But again, if you're doing it as a deliberate strategy, you're running into jeopardy of violating G30, where you're deliberately breaking the rules in order to gain an advantage. And so just be aware of that. In general, like, my comments would be, if two robots are going for the same pole, whoever's there first has the right of way, but they also have an obligation to complete the scoring and get out of the way to allow the second one to come in.
Right. And which a student asked if they are allowed to ask the poles to be adjusted if they feel like they're crooked. You can ask.
Yes,
you can ask. I would recommend that, like, as soon as you get on the field to set up your robot, like to like look at and ask about those things, because what a lot of times happens is, like, we've finished randomization and I'm about to do a 3, 2, 1 countdown to start the match, and a team will ask to adjust the pole. That's not an appropriate time to ask to adjust the pole. You have plenty of time as you're getting on the field to take a look at your field surroundings and ask field technical staff, like your FTA or a nearby referee or field resetter, to take a look at the pole. And you should be doing it as soon as you notice and not waiting until we're about to start the match to do it.
I also, going back to the two robots going for the same pole, I want to make a very important clarification from the question that is there, because the question asks whichever robot comes in the circumference of the silver plates, and that's not the case. It's when the cone goes over the silver plates or over the junction, not the robot.
And the vertical infinite cylinder.
Yes.
Imaginary.
So it's not whichever robot gets there first, it's whichever robot has the cone over the plate first, is the one that has the right to score. So if there's a robot, and let's say there's a robot and it's sitting above a junction pole and another one comes with a cone to try and score on it, but the first robot didn't have a cone that it was actively scoring, and that cone's not over the pole, then whichever robot gets the cone over the junction plate is really the one that has the right of way.
So I want to end this meeting on a final thought. I'm actually going to connect defensive play and gracious professionalism into one thought. And if I go out of bounds, Patrick, please let me know through your wisdom. So as I've said many times before in a lot of the motivational speeches that I give about First Tech Challenge, is I get asked a lot by students who think of robots. The first thing they think of is it like battle bots, dude? Is it like just robots trying to destroy each other, man? And no, First Tech Challenge is not a competition about destroying other people's robots. Our entire ethos is gracious professionalism. It's being gracious and professional. It's cooperation. It is a competition, but we are also helping each other out. The point of First Tech Challenge is not to destroy the other robots and therefore win. Rather, it's to have an amazing robot and win. Or you helped others, and by helping others, you helped yourself. Because your partner for one match might be your opposing ones in the next match. So it's not battle bots, it's build a bot. We're building robots to accomplish tasks. So the root behind a lot of the questions for defense, I feel, might have a philosophy problem with our program. If you are doing defense to make the other side lose, doesn't mean you're winning. You're just making the other sides lose. What's best in this game is to win by winning and by doing tasks. So in the rules, there's really the difference between defensive play and perfectly defensive play, or in other words, purely defensive play. So Patrick, can you give us the difference between purely defensive play versus just defensive play?
I will try. I'm going to preface this by saying, one, I don't speak for the game design committee. Two, there's not a definition of purely defensive play versus not purely defensive play. It's not in any of the manuals or anything like that. But I think I can characterize my understanding of it this way. If your strategy is built around the idea of preventing another team from scoring or causing another team to perform at a lower level, that is not related to your team performing at a higher level, right? Then that's not in the spirit of First Tech Challenge. So if I'm going and I'm scoring really fast, you know, and my robot is performing well, and I manage to get to a junction area prior to another robot, and that causes them to slow down, because they're not able to do things, or I'm able to get cones in a place that prevent, or beacons in a place that makes it harder for them to score a circuit, right? Those are all within bounds. Those are all, I'm scoring things, I'm doing things that improve my score, and it is having the impact of lowering their score, but my point is in improving my score, not merely in making theirs, making it harder or impossible for the other side to show off what their robot can do. You know, so that's kind of what I would look at. So if your strategy is all about, well, we're going to do this action because we think that it's going to limit the other team's ability to score, and it's not about our ability to score, then that's where you start crossing the line between just something that's defensive because it improves your score, or it improves the overall result of the match, to being more purely defensive, which is your whole strategy is built around preventing the other side from achieving their goals, and not about achieving any goals or any scoring goals of your own.
Friends, the point is this: win because you're better, not because the other side's worse. That's gracious professionalism.